So the person's not doing anything wrong. It's just that by feeling the same way, by thinking the same way, by making the same choices, by doing the same things, by having the same experiences and feeling the same emotions, their biology stays the same.
I'm your host, Dr. Joe Dispenza. Let's begin.
A person could have certain events that take place in their life that are predetermined for the soul's greatest evolution. And at the same time, there's enormous amounts of free will to continue to create anything you want on a moment-to-moment basis. And the soul isn't saying your soul contract is to be an artist. Your soul contract is to have the experience of the artist and the experience of the poet and the experience of the genius and the experience of the mystic. All of those experiences that exist as possibilities and potentials. But the soul that has cast a certain die for predeterminism is transcendent of space and time, and in that realm it's already happened, and it's arranged in a way that's going to bring the greatest evolution for the soul so that it can continue on in eternity. And eternity is a very long time, so we have a lot of experiences waiting for us when we get beyond, our physicality, our humanity. And so there is a combination of both, but in a sense, when we overcome the emotion, that's when we overcome the experience, and everything changes in that moment. And certain events will actually change if the soul evolves ahead of an event that would wake them up and cause them to ask greater questions. So free will and predeterminism work hand in hand.
Thank you for your question, Ellie. We're now going to put someone who is on our live call on to ask a question, and I'm going to ask Gregor, you're on the call.
I have MS for 15 years, and at the moment I'm using a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. My question is, because you said that instead of imagining how the disease disappearing, it is better to imagine the new life and the feeling like gratitude. And I am not sure if I'm doing it right, because I'm always imagining myself walk. I cannot walk at the moment, so I imagine myself walking, and I'm very happy with this. But I don't know if it's enough. I'm not sure.
Well, Gregor, I appreciate the fact that you're taking on your MS as a project, as something that you're interested and curious on how to change your body. And it's a question that will help many people. So what we know is that when certain genes are upregulated or certain genes are downregulated, the body either moves into a state of the expression of genes when they're upregulated, makes new proteins, and proteins are the messengers. They're the expression of life in so many different variations and so many different systems, and they actually add to the structure and function of our body. And the expression of proteins is the expression of life. And when genes downregulate, they break down and they start making cheaper proteins, and the body begins to decay and break down. And there's so many variations of different genes that people have, and MS just happened to be one of those where the gene has been downregulated. And so you're not doing anything wrong. It's just that there are many ways to go about signaling genes. And one of the things is the understanding that in epigenetics, they say that the environment signals the genes and create disease, not genes create disease, that there's got to be some instruction and then some selection of some gene that's coming from outside the cell on their cell receptor, and that the outer environment of the cell is also the environment. And when people stay in the same feelings every day, the body, the cell, is believing it's in the same environmental condition based on what the person is perceiving, what they're seeing in their outer world. So the person's not doing anything wrong. It's just that by feeling the same way, by thinking the same way, by making the same choices, by doing the same things, by having the same experiences and feeling the same emotions, their biology stays the same. And so our work is about teaching people how to signal the gene ahead of the environment And they can do that by changing their emotional state. Because if they're truly present and they're in an elevated emotional state, their body is so objective. It doesn't know the difference between the real life experience and the environment that's creating that emotion and the emotion that the person is creating just by thought alone. And so then if the person can associate a vision of them walking, I know when I had my own injury, after a certain amount of time, I just started thinking about all the things I couldn't wait to do if I was ever able to walk again. Watching the sunset. When I thought about watching the sunset, I'd get an image in my mind and I would feel the emotion of what it would feel like, and I would linger in that feeling, and I didn't know that my body was believing it was standing up on the beach in the sunset. And the stronger the emotion that I felt from the event, the more present I was in the moment, the more I could feel that elevated emotion, the more I was paying attention to the picture in my mind. And I was embossing that image neurologically in the brain, because the stronger the emotion, the more change in that same emotional state into a different emotional state. The alteration in your inner world causes you to pay attention to the picture in your mind, and you're remembering your future. It's a thought and a feeling. That's an image and an emotion. It's a stimulus and a response that starts the conditioning process. And that's how you begin to condition the body emotionally into the future. And if it's done properly, if it's done enough times, start knocking on the genetic door. And if you do it properly, all of a sudden, there's a natural selection and instruction of a new gene. And you begin to downregulate certain genes that have to do with the same emotional state. And you start upregulating new genes that have to do with growth and repair. And sometimes it happens on a very slow and microscopic level. And then the person comes back to their senses, and then they hate their spouse, they're angry in traffic, they get frustrated about the news, they live in the same environment, they never do anything differently, they never think any other ways, they have their own beliefs that they never question. And so the outcome is that they go back to the old person, and there's no change in their biology. And people in this work that have been astute and have healed understood this, that the preparation of changing their mind and body, their brain and body, and rehearsing how they are going to be in their life wasn't only just about walking, it was also how they were going to be with their coworkers, how they were going to be. And that was as valuable as walking, because they had to stay conscious of when they went unconscious and returned back to the old personality that was connected to the old personal reality, the environment, the body, and time, thinking the same way, acting the same way, and feeling the same way. That one meditation for an hour against at least 15 other hours of wakefulness as the old personality wasn't enough to make them change. They started really deconstructing or denaturing their personality by questioning their thoughts or becoming conscious of how they thought and noticing how they spoke and how they acted, and looking at their emotional responses. These responses weaken me or strengthen me. And that was when they got out of the bleachers and onto the playing field, and that's when they started doing the real work. The visualization of walking was just one small part of a new personality that had to think differently, that had to act differently, that had to feel differently. And there are behavior-dependent genes that become activated when you behave differently. There's experience-dependent genes that become activated when you experience things differently. And that's what we're finding out is being passed on to other generations. That's the wisdom that's being passed on genetically. So it's important then that we have the proper type of coherence in the brain. And that is the practice of what we do when we become nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere, and no time. That's where we enter the door into the field as pure consciousness. We sneak through a little pinhole, a little eye of the needle. Can't take anything material there. Material stays here in three-dimensional reality. The only thing can go is an awareness. And that kind of open awareness creates an enormous amount of coherence in the nervous system. And when we start feeling the elevated emotions and we stop feeling resentment and fear and anxiety and judgment, we're feeling more elevated emotional states. We don't want to lose that feeling. The heart gets more orderly and the autonomic nervous system starts moving back into regulation. There's impulses that are happening in a cadence in the autonomic nervous system that's signaling the cells with information. Many students in our work know how to slow their brain waves down to such coherence that the brain goes into an aroused state. And that aroused state is that gamma state, and that gamma state that's super coherent. So when the autonomic nervous system is now oscillating and vibrating at a very fast frequency, and that's what begins to cause the cell to heal in a shorter amount of time. The person's moving closer to singularity, more to wholeness. They're getting a taste of energy. And that's when there's an instantaneous change in the body. So this progression of what you're learning in overcoming your body here is a great challenge, no doubt about it. And it takes constant effort and constant awareness. And the act of repeating it, sometimes you have to do it 2 times a day, 3 times a day to get back into the feelings of your future and to be able to stay there and let those feelings drive new thoughts, new ideas. Feelings drive new behaviors, new ways to act. You start changing your personality, and many people will say, God, it was the act of overcoming all my disbeliefs, my persistent disbeliefs about if I could do this or not. Many people say, I believe in this stuff, but people are now saying, well, I just didn't know that I believed that it worked for everybody else but me. And I had to prove to myself it did work for me. Well, that's a great decision. And those people are just like you in the investigative process. They're investigating what it's going to take. And they watch the testimonials on the website, and they love the testimonials on the website, and they keep reading the information again, and they keep studying it, and they keep applying it. And they start realizing it's not just visualizing a change in their health condition, it's visualizing a change in themselves and the responses to different people, different circumstances in their life. And that's when their healing really begins. So you just got to add to the toolbox, fill the basket with variations of doing it, and change up your meditations a little bit here and there, and review the information again, and go after it fresh and new and with a different energy, with a different understanding. And I promise, even as you begin to make those changes and more genes become upregulated, the win, I can tell you from my own personal convalescence, from my own healing, from my injury, the moment I noticed a change in my body, the moment I woke up one day and I said, oh my God, I feel better. I feel differently. I don't have that feeling anymore, or the lack of feeling anymore, the pain. The moment that started happening, then it was no longer the same. That's when I knew that I could begin to continually influence my body. And you just got to look for that one small change, Gregor. And when you get that, when you latch onto that, you'll pay attention to what you did the last time, and you'll do it with more intention, more meaning. And that's when you start to accelerate.